Good afternoon, and welcome to all of you in the room and online. I'm looking at you there. I am Dr. Margot Pinault. I'm a project coordinator at the Center on Conflict, Development and Peace Building here at the Geneva Graduate Institute. And I have known and worked our panelists for many years. It's my pleasure to moderate this discussion with them today. So why are we here? Since 2023, Switzerland has been serving as an elected member on the UN Security Council for the first time in history. And as its membership draws to an end, after two, I think we can say, difficult years, many questions arise. What has this membership implied concretely? What has Switzerland achieved, and what limitations has it faced? What comes next at the end of the membership? And more broadly, perhaps, what role can we draw about, what lessons can we draw about the role of small states in global peace governance in a context of escalating conflicts and geopolitical competition? So our panelists are here to provide some answers to these questions based on the research that they're conducting on the topic. Their research project is a collaboration between the University of Lausanne, the Geneva Graduate Institute, and ETH Zurich, and it is funded by the Fondation pour l'Université de Lausanne. So let me introduce them in a bit more detail now. Professor Lucille Martin is Associate Professor of Political Science and International Relations at the Graduate Institute, and she's co-director of its Global Governance Center. Her research focuses on international organizations, multilateral procedures, global environmental governance, and issues related to temporality and depoliticization. She has been carrying out research and teaching on this topic for the past 15 years, and her most recent book is titled La dépoliticisation du monde, published in 2024 by Les Presses de l'Université de Montréal. And next to her is Dr. Sarah Helm, who is a senior researcher at the Center for Security Studies at ETH Zurich, and also lead investigator of two SNSF-funded projects co-hosted here at the CCDP. Her work focuses on peace and conflict research, with a particular focus on the link between world politics and UN peace missions, norms in peacemaking, and knowledge production on peace. She has also 15 years of academic and practical experience related to these topics. She's the author of the UN Peace Mission Mandates dataset, which is one of the most comprehensive peace missions dataset to date. And she's currently working on her new book, which is provisionally entitled UN Mediation in a Multipolar World, the Case of Syria. So for the next 30 minutes, Lucille and Sarah are going to present their work. And at 1 p.m., we will open the floor for a Q&A, and we'll take questions from our audience in the room and online. So Sarah and Lucille, thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Margot. Bonjour, bienvenue à tous et à toutes. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. It's really our pleasure to be here today to present some of the results of our research project that Margot kindly introduced, and to discuss the very first mandate of Switzerland at the UN Security Council. Switzerland launched its campaign to become an elected member at the UN Security Council in 2011, was elected by a large support in 2022, and defined 4 priorities for its mandate: protection of civilians, climate security, sustainable peace, and the effectiveness of the UN system. Today, the way that we're going to present our talk going to be based on the research project, and I would like to mention the fact that we are also working with Flavia Keller, who is a PhD student doing her PhD on this specific topic. And the project is really dedicated to document the Swiss mandate, but to have a better understanding of how the UN Security Council is working in practice, and specifically understanding the role and the daily practices of elected members. So the way we're going to organize our talk, we have in 4 parts. Sarah will going to start with talking about the context, the fact that it's a very specific, challenging context at the moment, and there's different challenges of different natures that the Swiss delegation has been encountering during these 2 years. Then we're going to be focusing on a form of summary of what Switzerland has been doing for the last 2 years. We'll then look into the presidency, thinking about what it means to be a president of the Security Council in terms of a moment during the membership, but also in terms of a practice and what concretely Switzerland did as a president of the council. And then we're going to briefly conclude on a form of outlook of what are the lessons learned for Switzerland, but also more broadly for multilateralism. So now I'll give the floor to Sarah.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone also from my side. I will start with speaking a little bit about the context, so the first part of our presentation. And overall, I think we can start by saying that the Swiss mandate at the UN Security Council has happened in a very difficult situation, in a very difficult context. We see enormous human suffering in currently ongoing armed conflicts. Gaza, of course, is on our mind, but also Ukraine, Sudan, Myanmar, and others. And the collective failure to protect civilians in these contexts, of course, casts a long shadow on the work of the UN Security Council, in principle, the main body in charge of international peace and security. Now, more specifically, I think when we speak about the context in which the Swiss mandate took place, we can look at 3 levels of challenges: international challenges, institutional challenges, and domestic challenges. And I will go through them one by one. So first, internationally speaking, we have seen major global power shifts leading to increased geopolitical competition. And at the same time, we see a higher number of so-called internationalized armed conflicts, meaning armed conflicts where the conflict parties are supported by external actors. And this international context has led to blockages of the UN Security Council in conflicts where geopolitical stakes are high, and of course where one of its permanent members is involved, such as in Syria, Ukraine, or Gaza. And this has manifested in the Security Council in an increase in the use of veto by the permanent members, blocking the adoption of resolutions in the Security Council. To just mention a few numbers, from 2001 to 2010, we had an average of 1.4 vetoes a year. This number rose to 2.5 vetoes a year in the next decade, and now we are already at 3.3 vetoes per year. So this shows the increased polarization and blockage of the UN Security Council on some issues. At the same time, we have a decrease of unanimous renewals of UN peace missions, as well as a decrease of presidential statements which require unanimity in the Security Council. Second, at the institutional level, we have the so-called crisis of multilateralism, unilateral actions by member states circumventing the UN, and also a liquidity crisis with, if you recall, last winter, the Palais des Nations being closed because member states had not paid their bills. And of course, also more recently, we had some of the worst worst attacks on the UN, with Israel's foreign minister, for instance, declaring UN Secretary General Guterres as persona non grata, attacks by the Israeli army on the UNIFIL peacekeepers in South Lebanon, and the Israeli parliament outlawing UNRWA's activities. So the UN is under attack, and all of this implies a questioning of the key values and norms that the UN is supposed to promote. And then finally, domestically speaking, Switzerland's Security Council mandate was contested internally. It had led to heated domestic debates, mostly regarding its compatibility with neutrality. And there was a parliamentary decision actually on its candidacy, which is exceptional. The chairs of the foreign affairs committees of the parliament are consulted on decisions regarding 2 aspects: one, sanctions regimes, and second, enforcement measures. And these internal consultation mechanisms are also exceptional for elected members on the Security Council. So overall, this context, international, institutional, and domestic, means that the Council is highly polarized, although not entirely blocked, on key issues it should address. This also means that the elected members may not be able to use the full potential of their membership, and they may focus on more technical rather than political issues to at least do something. But, as observers also note, this polarization may of course also give them more room for maneuver in terms of bridge building and innovating in working methods of the Council. Moreover, the domestic context has meant that Switzerland had actually to carefully balance its activities in New York with the concern not to create domestic upheaval or context or backlash of its mandate. So overall, in summary, the context means that the UN Security Council continues to work and elected members can play important roles, but however, it is blocked on certain issues. Now, let's turn to kind of the summary of the membership of Switzerland. And here we will first say something about the substantive files that Switzerland managed to promote in the Security Council, and then speak more about the methods of work. In terms of substantive files, I think three issues actually stand out. First is that Switzerland really stood out as a champion of international law in the Security Council. And this is shown in three aspects. First, it consistently recalled international law, particularly international humanitarian law, and in particular in files where the UN Security Council is blocked: Ukraine, Gaza, Myanmar. Second, Switzerland also contributed to strengthening the instruments of international law. It acted, for instance, as focal point together with Japan on the ICC, and it recalled the importance of the Geneva Conventions, for instance, during an informal visit of the Security Council here in Geneva in August this year. Third, Switzerland also promoted specific aspects of international humanitarian law, such as the promotion of the protection of civilians, one of its priorities. For instance, and this was quite remarkable, Switzerland brought in a resolution on the protection of humanitarian and UN personnel in conflict zones, which is adopted in May this year. Of course, this may all seem to be just diplomatic rhetoric, but recalling international law is crucial given the current contestation of norms and values at the core of the UN. And it also shows that the international community, at least rhetorically, still upholds these values. The second remarkable thing on substantive issues was that Switzerland also contributed to ensuring that the mandates of UN peace missions were renewed, a key task of the Security Council. While many of these peace missions are under heavy pressure, or actually had to withdraw recently, like the mission in Mali or Sudan, and we know that the mission in Congo is transitioning out, others are still renewed in the Council, such as the mission in Colombia or South Sudan, and they continue to play important roles in the context of deployment. Switzerland contributed to these mandate renewals. It, for instance, successfully led negotiations on the renewal of the mandate of EUFOR Althea in Bosnia-Herzegovina in November last year. And then finally, on substance, Switzerland was also particularly active in keeping the topic of climate security on the agenda, another one of its 4 priorities. Language on climate security proposed by Switzerland was, for instance, integrated in peace missions mandate renewals in the missions in Haiti, South Sudan, or Iraq. Switzerland also acted as co-pen holder with Sierra Leone on a presidential statement adopted in May on the Sahel and West Africa that acknowledged the exacerbating effects of climate change on the security in the region. And it co-chairs the informal expert group on climate security with Mozambique. All these activities are especially remarkable given the continued contestation by some member states, including permanent ones, that climate security should actually not be on the agenda of the Security Council, not considering the Security Council as the body in charge of addressing these issues. So the advancement of these substantive files shows that not all activities are actually touched by the polarization amongst the great powers, and that elected members can play an important role by being pen holders, proposing language, co-chairing expert groups, and being bridge builders. And Lucille will now speak more about specific methods of work.
Yes, so to continue this overview of the Swiss mandate and to discuss what elected members can do, what we've been seeing by documenting these 2 years is that one way that Switzerland tried to actually play a bigger role at the Council was to work around the working methods of the Security Council. So that might not be the thing that gets the headlines in the press, but it's actually by knowing exactly how the Council is working that elected members can move a few things. And so we wanted to show you like a couple of examples on how elected member can use the institutional practices and rules to advance specific agenda. What we know from the academic literature on other elected members' experience is that one way that they've been using these different methods is by using coalitions, by being pen holders and drafting resolution, or by using a form of niche diplomacy or specific expertise on a specific topic. And this, in the case of Switzerland, has been completely applied. In the case of the resolution 2728 that was adopted on the 25th of March of this year, this was the first collective decision demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza during Ramadan after more than 6 months of war and after 5 vetoes. In this case, 14 votes in favor, 1 abstention by the US, and Switzerland really used all the different techniques. First, by gathering a coalition of all elected members. It was the first time in the history of the Security Council that all elected members put forward this resolution together. Switzerland also participating in drafting the resolution, use diplomatic negotiation to make sure that it would get approved, and use Switzerland expertise on the protection of civilians, so this niche kind of diplomacy, to justify and to legitimize the resolution. So these are, I would say, the application of what we already knew that elected members were doing. If we look more specifically in the form of, I would say, innovation or a form of creativity that the Swiss mandate has been developing in the last 2 years, we would like to point to 3 kinds of innovation. The first one is a series of institutional practices and rules that were designed to renew the Security Council approach, specifically its approach to facts by focusing on expertise and science diplomacy. So Switzerland has been chairing like different expert groups, for example, which is a way to show the importance of expertise, but also has been pushing what they've called the science diplomacy agenda by a series of events, by including this as one of the key topics that was discussed when they invited the Security Council to visit Geneva last summer. Another way that they have creatively used methods is by relaunching field visits. So field visits have been more and more used since the end of the Cold War, so meaning that the Security Council will go directly to the field, but they have been stopped in October 2019, just before the COVID-19 pandemic. And then Switzerland was one of the elected members that actually pushed to reorganize those field visits by having first the expert group on women, peace and security to do a visit in South Sudan in late 2023, and having the council visiting Colombia in February 2024 before the visit in Geneva. And what is interesting with this field visit is that not only it helps decenter the UN Security Council, it helps the council members to be able to have first-hand information, but in a way it can also re-legitimize the council that has been criticized a lot for being completely disconnected from the reality of the field. And so by bringing the council to the field is also a way to give legitimacy to the institution and give legitimacy to multilateralism overall. And that's maybe the last innovation that we wanted to highlight is how Switzerland has been really pushing for reinforcement of the partnership between multilateral organizations, and especially with regional organizations. So we've seen that a lot with the case of the African Union. Switzerland organized an open debate on financing of African Union-led peace operation. This debate led to the adoption of a resolution in December of last year that endorsed this sustainable financing. And Switzerland also organized the very first retreat of the members of the Security Council, along with the member of the African Union Peace and Security Council. And to do this, Switzerland actually used its role as president to be able to push for this. And so this leads me to our third part of our talk about specifically the role of the president of the Security Council. So the Security Council has a rotating presidency, meaning that every month there's a new member, it's alphabetically, a new member who will take the role of president. As the title implies, it means that this country will be presiding the meetings, but also that the president will be representing the council as an organ of the UN. They will plan the program of work with the support of the Secretariat. They would invite speakers, facilitate communication and exchange of information among members, but there's also a lot of coordination work. So as you can imagine, it's a pretty intense period when you're a mission that you are taking the role of president. And what is really important is that even in very difficult times, like the one that we are seeing today, the president has a responsibility to make sure that the Security Council continue to work. Because so the Security Council has been criticized a lot for its lack of effectiveness, lack of representativeness, but it's still a place where major powers and rivals actually have to talk to each other regularly. And so this is also the role of the president to make sure that we maintain this line of communication. It's also make sure that there is a continuation of the program of work, because it's not like they arrive and there is an empty schedule and they can decide whatever they want to put in the schedule. Every year you have like debates, like annual thematic and geographical debates that are happening approximately at the same period. The mandate renewal, sanction committee meetings. So it's really about making sure that the work of the council continue. But at the same time, being president is also an opportunity to negotiate new items on the agenda and to call for emergency meetings. And so what we can see with the case of Switzerland is that it's about finding a balance between the continuity and using creativity to be able to even innovate in the way that you are working as an elected member.
And we would also, regarding the presidency, we wanted to draw attention to basically three aspects that were particularly remarkable during the presidency. And the first one was clearly that the events in the Middle East, of course, kind of dominated the discussions in the Council. And there, Switzerland had a particular role to do exactly what Lucille said, so to maintain continuity of discussions and also to react, of course, timely to what was happening almost every day. And it is not an exaggeration, I think, to say that the UN during the month of October really faced some of the strongest verbal and real attacks in the last month, as I mentioned before. And I would say that Switzerland has really managed to respond timely using the tools at its disposal also as a president of the Council. And one way of responding to escalating violence is, of course, through press statements and to immediately also clarify where the UN Security Council or some of its members stand on key issues. For instance, when Israel's foreign minister declared Antonio Guterres persona non grata, Switzerland organized a media stakeout on behalf of all UN security members in support of the Secretary General. Or in response to the attacks on UNIFIL peacekeepers, also Switzerland published press statements, first on behalf of just the elected members, and then later, when unanimity could be found, also on behalf of all members of the Security Council, recalling that attacks on peacekeepers constitute violations of international law. Switzerland also organized emergency meetings. They can be called by all member states. For instance, it called one on 28th of this month of October on Iran-Israel escalation. But of course, overall, also I think the Middle East and this unfolding situation has also shown the limits of the UN Security Council and the collective failure of it to protect the civilians in Gaza and Lebanon. A second aspect that dominated or that Switzerland really tried to promote during its presidency was, of course, the Women, Peace and Security agenda. the annual open debate on the topic took place in October, and Federal Councillor Viola Amherd actually underlined the importance of women participation in mediation. It was quite exceptional because she was the first female president to actually chair this open debate this year, and she introduced a booklet written by female mediators. Switzerland also invited many female briefers, bringing the amount of female briefers to the same level as the amount of male briefers. And it also organized a press stakeout on the vital role of women in peacebuilding ahead of a UN Security Council briefing on Colombia. So this is another topic that Switzerland promoted, and it used its presidency and the different working methods of the Council to do so.
And to finish on what Switzerland has been doing from a presidency perspective, is that it not only continued the debate, so in terms of reacting to the situation or continuing the debate on a previously decided agenda, like the Women, Peace and Security agenda, but it also used its presidency to promote new or at least less institutionalized items, and that we can mention again the case of science diplomacy. Here, during the first presidency, so in May 2023, Switzerland organized an ARIA formula meeting. So it's quite common now to organize ARIA formula meetings. That's informal meetings to be able to address issues that are not formally on the agenda of the Council yet. And the topic of that meeting was unlocking the power of science for peace and security. And what is interesting is that, in a way, it's using a very political role, being the president, to actually lessen political rivalries. Because the entire debate was around the fact that the Security Council should have, and I'm quoting, evidence-based analysis and decision-making. So it's trying to also kind of de-escalate the polarization of the Council by using, in a way, a very political moment as being the president. During the second presidency, it further advanced the science diplomacy agenda by having a high-level briefing on anticipating the impact of scientific development on international peace and security that was chaired by Federal Councillor Ignacio Cassis. Here, what was interesting is that the focus was slightly different. It was it was still connecting to science and diplomacy, but more on the role of the president to raise attention to potential emerging threats, to focus on prevention and anticipation. And this led to a two-page presidential statement, and as we said earlier, like Sarah mentioned, it's pretty rare at the moment that we manage to get unanimity to have presidential statements that acknowledge the role of science, technology, and innovation, both in terms of positive and negative impacts. During the presidency, Switzerland has been also sharing different initiatives, like the use of AI to better report on the council meetings or the danger of deepfakes. And I think it's a good example to see how president can achieve consensus while also bringing an emerging topic and also valuing multilateralism, because there's been a lot of mention about the pact of the future for the future in this debate. And I think it connects well with how the Swiss mission itself summarized its own presidency by putting the emphasis, and I quote, on prevention, innovation, and transparency. So now to conclude, before giving you the floor, we just wanted briefly to have a discussion around the legacy of this 2 years membership. So looking first at Switzerland, on a short-term perspective, what is really interesting now to look at is what would be the implication in terms of future diplomatic relations. Because this mandate has raised a international profile of Switzerland, but now it remains to see if Switzerland will be able to capitalize on it and sustain the links that it has built with the different countries, and especially the P5 that were with Switzerland at the Council. And I think it connects with the other multilateral commitments that Switzerland has been taking at the Council of Europe, but also at the UN Human Rights Council, in a way to continue this role as the advocate of multilateralism and humanitarian law. If we look at a more medium-term perspective here, we could ask ourselves, what does it mean for international Geneva? because Switzerland has been using its 2-year mandate to promote Geneva-based actors, inviting briefers from Geneva institution, also promoting Geneva expertise, including on science diplomacy, human rights, humanitarian law. Switzerland has been emphasizing the relation between Geneva and New York with the last visit in August, but also with a mention of this very close relationship during the Geneva Peace Week a few weeks ago. And so now we have to see how this will materialize in the future and if actually this mandate was able to get a bit closer to UN hubs. And looking at a longer-term perspective now, it's asking yourself now that we're trying to appreciate the results of this mandate is when Switzerland would be reapplying to be again at the Security Council, because this, like the regional group in which Switzerland belongs, is a very competitive group, and states have been announcing their candidacy more and more in advance, and often they already know when they leave, when they want to come back. And so I think the next couple of years where we're going to be discussing what it has brought to Switzerland, this will also be in the back of our mind, thinking about when will be the next mandate. And very finally, on what does it mean in terms of the legacy for elected members and multilateralism, the lesson that we can draw from the Swiss membership is that it's a very demanding role to be an elected member at the Security Council in terms of level of professionalization, level of expertise, but also in terms of the political risk, because it's the states would be in very scrutinized, potentially criticized, there'd be debates internationally and domestically. But it's also a very critical role, and especially in the crisis of multilateralism that we're seeing today, we can see more innovation than we expected, especially through working methods. There's also unexpected room for maneuver, especially because the P5s are divided. So that gives also more, I would say, responsibility to the elected members. But this requires political courage and willingness, and also to enter the very, I would say, difficult question of the reform of the system and how elected members can play a big role in this discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucille and Sarah, for such a comprehensive presentation. It really took us through a whole journey already. And I think one thing I find particularly striking in your project is that you're not just looking at how many resolutions Switzerland was able to pass or statements put out, but really at all those microdynamics of negotiations and working processes that lead to these events. And you can do that because the membership is happening right now and you're engaging with diplomats in New York and beyond, and I think it's pretty unique for a research project, and I'm grateful we hear about some of the findings. All right, I think we have about 25 minutes now for questions and answers, and we have many of you here in the room and online. So I want to give you a chance to ask your questions. I also have a tablet here for questions coming in online, if there are any. So please raise your hands if you would like to ask a question to our panelists. If we have enough, I would like to take a few at once. And if you take the mic, please remember to introduce yourselves and be concise. No interventions with just comments, please. And also feel free to ask your questions in French, as our panelists would be happy to respond that way. Do we have questions in the room? Yeah, so I see the first hand here, then perhaps.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My name is Orko. I'm from the Institute itself. So given these two themes came up, which was about how the Council, a lot of times, because of the crisis ongoing, not just now, but even in the past, has so much to deal with, that a lot of times these individual representations of non-permanent members who get elected are not able to push through their own mandate priorities, right? However, it was highlighted that the Swiss presidency was able to do it. But in the past, many countries have not been able to do so. So is there any particular reason that the project has identified as to why Switzerland was able to push it? Is it because of its unique positionality in terms of how, let's say, it's a center for humanitarian and human rights, whereas other countries from different regions might not have been able to use that positionality. So just this, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we had another hand that way. So gentleman first, and then there's a lady at the back as well afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I am Ángel Horna from the Permanent Mission of Peru here in Geneva. I am very glad to have participated in this event. I myself was prior in my career in New York with Peru's team in the Security Council in our fifth participation as a non-permanent member. And it's really interesting to see the different aspects that you have touched upon, be it in substance or on the working methods. So I guess I have two questions on each of the topics. Regarding the priorities, you mentioned international law, and of course, you also mentioned that Switzerland and Japan are the focal points of the ICC. And the ICC is currently under, in a very, very complicated situation, as you all know. So how is other avenues of accountability mechanisms that Switzerland has been putting forward in the Security Council? I'm thinking of mechanisms, non-judicial mechanisms, because we know that we cannot get the unity to, again, refer a case to the ICC. So the ICC probably, I imagine that when there's an ICC briefing, some seats are empty in the Security Council, or it's very difficult. So what's happening regarding other avenues of accountability? And then on the methods of work, I wanted to know if some of the improvements in the methods of work, there is this Note 507 that is updated every few years, and some of the discussions there that we try to also push forward when in our time was, for instance, to have the meetings between the elected 10 and the Secretary General every month, because in the past it was only the Secretary General meeting with the P5 but not with the E10. So there were also monthly meetings of E10 ambassadors precisely to coordinate views of elected members. So is this something that is kept in the work of the Security Council right now, the way you are following? That will be it. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to getting to know the final outcome of the research.
Thank you. Thank you. So, lady at the back, please.
Thank you. My name's Meha. I just want to ask, could you tell me a little bit more about the sustainable finance agenda that Switzerland has put forth? Could you just elaborate on that a little? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Should we turn to you with these 4 questions?
Okay, I will start and then Lucille will complement. So the first question, thank you very much, Orca. I think, so for me, the reasons for why, maybe first start by saying, I think of the 4 priorities, there were some priorities that Switzerland managed to push more than others. And I think the difference was really made in terms of whether the priorities or the agenda items have already been there. So it took over from maybe other elected members or took over from existing discussions, for instance, or also existing engagements that Switzerland has had even before becoming a member of the Security Council. I think, for instance, that Switzerland managed to keep climate security on the agenda. We mentioned that it's also because it had been on the agenda before, so it was kind of taking it over from other elected members. And then I'm also thinking about the fourth priority of increasing the efficiency of the council. Switzerland has been also a member of the ACT group, so increasing accountability, coherence and transparency of the council before. So also there it managed to kind of build on earlier work. However, if we think about the priority of protection of civilians, and if we look at the current state of the world, I don't think that this priority has been pushed to the extent that it could have been pushed potentially. And then also sustaining peace. I mean, Switzerland did a lot in terms of also keeping that on the agenda, but still more could have been done. But I think the difference was really made in terms of to what extent it had taken over from other existing elected members, and to what extent it could build on earlier work. The second question, thank you very much, for the priorities, or what are other mechanisms of increasing the accountability of the ICC? I think it's a very difficult question, and as you are saying, also the ICC is under heavy pressure. I think what we saw also, and what Switzerland is trying to do or has done, some of the activities regarding the ICC, not only acting as focal point with Japan for issues related to the ICC, which already is important, again, to keep kind of the discussion ongoing on the role of the ICC. But it has also organized debates, it had chaired debates on the ICC, which is very important. And then again, press statements and kind of official statements about the role of the ICC, and also linking it to specific context. For instance, strengthening the role of the ICC in regarding Darfur or Libya, that is also important. Plus, also Switzerland has underlined the importance of cooperation between the ICC and the UN Security Council, and is trying to strengthen that. So I think those are some of the mechanisms. Nothing kind of magic, of course, but some of the mechanisms that can help.
Thanks a lot for the questions. So maybe going back to the question on the method of work, from what we heard, actually, there is a monthly meeting with the Secretary General and the E10. So I think that's something that was pushed at the right moment, because now it's been implemented. But we also have seen a growing coordination work between elected members. With also this, there's a training for incoming members to be able to get to understand the working methods, but also informal discussion between like-minded states when they know that there is like a close ally that's going to be in the council after themselves, how they can try to passer le flambeau. There's a like passage of the baton or the torch, and I think this was the case for the climate security agenda point, for example, which I think is also interesting to see that sometimes your priority might not be achieved when you are the council, but a few years later, because they are continued by other elected members, it's a collective effort, because you need to really realize 2 years is super short, actually, to be able to achieve something in such a complex institution, especially in the current context. And maybe going back to the question of the specific positionality of Switzerland, it's true that what we've seen is that Switzerland has been having like a very good reputation in terms of being a neutral broker, being a bridge builder, and I think this also played a role on how they were able to achieve a few things at the council, maybe differently than other countries could have been able to do so. And the different characteristic of Switzerland as being a neutral state, a small or medium-sized state as well, which so part of different initiatives that could like also gather those types of states, but also being the host of International Geneva, it gives a lot of credibility to Switzerland as a multilateral actor. And so that also, I think, plays a role in how Switzerland has been able to achieve a few things at the Council. And to the question to sustainable finance, it's actually, so Switzerland has been pushing two agendas that maybe got confused. One is sustainable peace, and the other one is climate security, but not really sustainable finance at the Council. They've been in other places, but I don't think this has been really something that was pushed. It was more about sustaining for example, the financing of peace operation. So not in the sense of it's like sustainable peace. It's a very interesting wording because it's you can connect it to the sustainable, like sustainability and the SDGs. But in this sense, it's not really I would say environmental sustainability that is implied, but more in a sense of duration in time.
Thank you very much. We have one question coming in to the chat, and then if other questions are in the room, please let us know. So we have a question online from Balkissou Hayatou from the University of Paris Panthéon-Assas. And the person is asking, if you had to sum up Switzerland's presidency of the Security Council in 5 keywords, what would they be? And for what reasons? Do we have other questions in the room? Please.
Thank you very much for organizing this presentation. I would have 2 questions. The first to Lucille, maybe regarding, you mentioned some of the success stories, but I want to maybe question a bit of the resolution that didn't pass regarding the cross-border aid on Syria. I think, if I can recall, Switzerland was co-pin holder on that resolution. So from your research, did you have any insight why I would not say why the resolution didn't pass, because it is, I think, was blocked by Russia at the time. Maybe it is related to the context, but regarding Switzerland and the method that you mentioned, was it about like being new to the membership? I think it was in the early days of the membership, maybe about limitation of the non-permanent members, etc. So what insight did you have regarding this point from the research? And to Sarah, if I understood you well regarding the role of the national parliament or the national politics, so apparently the permanent mission need to go back in some cases related to the enforcement issues when it comes to the voting at the Security Council. It's unique, of course, maybe related to the uniqueness of Swiss practices and political system. Beyond the advantages and disadvantages, in the research scope, I don't know if you highlight or if you investigate that in the research project. What does that mean to bring the Security Council to the local level? And the local national discussion, politically speaking, does that bring more legitimacy to the UN membership, or more challenges to that? And could that be applied to other countries or not? I can understand that it's unique to Switzerland now, but in terms of like best practices later on, can that be advised to other countries to bring these sort of discussion during their membership to the national level discussion? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we had one other one here.
Thank you for your presentation. And I have a question. As we all know, Switzerland is a neutral state. So does this identity of neutral states, how does it affect your work and also the ways that you're looking at and the mechanism of the Security Council? How do you deal with the agenda in the mechanism in a very polarized mechanism in terms of the geopolitics? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I turn to you?
Thanks a lot for the questions. Balkissou, this is a very challenging question because, so as I mentioned very briefly in the presentation, Switzerland itself summarized its own presidency on Twitter by saying that they focused on prevention, intervention, and transparency. So that was their own 3 keywords. I would say that one of them for me would be something around the as Sarah mentioned, the multilateral champion, or in French we'll say le bon élève, in the way that Switzerland has been trying to continue the work as it's supposed to be done, respecting the rule, trying to enforce so that the working methods will be the best use in terms of credibility and transparency. So I think this is something that will be one of my words. Probably creativity in how, while being the bon élève, they will still try to find ways to innovate and being able to bring to the council different ways of doing things that could have lasting consequences. And maybe a final one would be challenging, because it's especially the last presidency. I mean, it was a very difficult month, as has been mentioned. It's been two difficult years, but also having to represent the most important, most criticized UN organ at the same time, while being under attack, is also very challenging. I would say presidency. Now to go back to the questions on why resolutions do not pass, and maybe also because I think Sarah will probably also have input on this, and maybe also on the question of is it that the local level, is it a problem, or is it something that is bringing more democracy in a way to the council? I think for the first thing, I think there is something very true about what you say about being new members. I think I mentioned the different dimension of the identity of Switzerland as an elected member. As I said, neutral state, small state, host of multilateralism, but also a first-time elected member. So there was also a learning curve for Switzerland. I think we saw also that even though Switzerland was very prepared, they hired lots of people. It was very challenging to get into the work of on a daily basis, because Switzerland was weighted everywhere. You know, there's some smaller states that were not expecting to have an opinion on everything, which was not the case of Switzerland, because specifically of its history with multilateralism, which means that you need to have experts on every single topic that will be discussed at the council to be able to have a consolidated position that you need then to negotiate with Bern to make sure that it's also in connection with the domestic level. So you see how all of this means that it took some time to get the machine working well. That being said, and I think it also relates to the question that was asked earlier about if the ICC do not work, what does Switzerland can do? I think Switzerland has been pretty good at using also diplomacy and being quite vocal sometimes to even, criticize some of the other members to kind of make it go in that direction, but maybe in this case that was not possible. In terms of how we could see this connection also with the local, something that was interesting in our ongoing investigation is how some states were actually quite afraid of this democracy, Swiss democracy, and that how the Switzerland membership will be impacted the way the council will be working, because they were afraid that it will take so long for Switzerland to be able to position themselves on some topics, and it actually did not manifest in like the coordination work was extremely efficient. And maybe a final point on the neutral state, in the way that we try to analyze it also in the research project, is not only about taking neutrality as granted, but just really thinking about how the political usage of neutrality. And so it's still, like, the investigation is ongoing. So there is not a lot of findings to share at this point, but it's for sure something that we've been looking at already.
Thank you very much. On the first point, I fully agree, of course, with Lucille. I would just also add, like, one of my 5 characteristics of Switzerland's membership would also really be the kind of professionalism and commitment, because especially also when visiting New York and the mission, etc., you can really see the commitment of the staff at the mission there, of the ambassador, the permanent representative, and really kind of, I think overall we can say they have really acted very professionally. Also, given the kind of mental load, if you imagine to work on these difficult issues every day, the blockage of the Security Council, the human suffering, etc. So I think that's also an important characteristic of the membership. with regards to the cross-border, the resolution on cross-border humanitarian delivery in Syria, I read some analysis, and I think most would say that there was hardly anything that Switzerland could do, because Russia was convinced that it would not want to extend it. It first limited, before it was always extended by 1 year, and then it was limited by 6 months only, which some of the elected members actually didn't regret necessarily, because then it was ended in summer and not in winter, when most of the humanitarian needs are most dire. But yeah, this was something, of course, where lessons could still be learned. But I think it would have been difficult for any elected member there to convince Russia to agree to the renewal. With regard to the role of the national parliament, actually, in the end, the chairs of the foreign policy committees, they were consulted only twice now during the membership. One when police troops were authorized for Haiti, Kenyan-led police troops, and then on the question of Palestine as a full member of the UN, where the UN Security Council has to give a positive recommendation for it then to be voted in the General Assembly. And there it was actually quite interesting, because in the end Switzerland abstained from the vote, which was heavily criticized by many member states in New York, but it was also in order not to create any domestic upheaval in Switzerland. And this actually is exactly kind of, I think, the lessons learned from this. Of course, having to go through parliament for difficult decisions may give more legitimacy, but the pace in New York is very high, so very fast, and sometimes it may also lead to decisions not being up to speed, but also maybe, how can I put this delicately, maybe the missions in New York would be more courageous on some of the issues, whereas then if it has to go through parliament and domestic kind of the domestic machinery, it may lead to more kind of less courage, because the main concern then becomes not to create any domestic backlash, rather than really what may be best for international peace and security. So the logic becomes, or is a different one, whether you speak domestically or internationally. And then on the neutral state, just to complement what Lucille said, what was interesting is that the domestic debate in Switzerland before was all about, is this compatible with neutrality? And observers in New York say that the neutrality of Switzerland is hardly ever a topic, really, in New York. Yes, Switzerland is seen as a bridge builder, etc., but it's not really about, is Switzerland now neutral or not? Plus, I think we can also conclude from the 2-year mandate that there has never been a situation where Switzerland had to position itself that could have affected its neutrality, because all the areas where it had to position itself would have also happened outside, or have happened also outside of the Security Council. So it was not its mandate in the Security Council which made or forced Switzerland to position itself on aspects that were critical for neutrality. So, conclusion, I don't think neutrality can be used in the future as an argument for Switzerland not to reapply for membership of the UN Security Council.
Thank you very much. So we have 2 minutes left and one more question in the chat. Should I mention the question and then you respond while also maybe providing a few last words? We have a question from Dr. Dana Laundo from Swiss Peace, and she's asking, she's looking ahead and asking if you think these 2 years as a member will have an impact on domestic debates about Switzerland's role in the world. So that's a nice way to to open up also to the coming years.
Thanks a lot for the question. I think it's like we're trying to conclude a bit on this, and maybe one side I would say would be towards the role of international Geneva. I think this will definitely be part of the discussion of how Switzerland can capitalize and build on this experience to be able to not only make sure that international Geneva is in the mind of New York, because the two hubs are quite disconnected in many ways, but also maybe to find a way to renew international Geneva during the crisis of multilateralism by being able to connect it to broader issues that are, I would say, not only dealt in New York, but also at the field level.
And I think it has also really shown that in German I often use, or I often hear the term now amongst diplomats that die Schweiz kann Sicherheitsrat, Switzerland can UN Security Council. So it has shown that Switzerland is actually capable and highly professional in being a member of the UN Security Council. So it has also diffused all the fears and concerns beforehand. So hopefully this will then also lead to kind of more courage in the future to take up similar roles to promote multilateralism.
Thank you very much. So we are arriving at the end of our session today. Of course, as we just saw, the conversation continues, the research project continues. Switzerland will be a member on the UN Security Council until the end of the year. So hopefully this was just a taster of conversations to come. Thank you very much, Lucille and Sarah, for sharing so generously your research findings with us. And thanks to all of you in the room here and online for joining us. Let me use this space to announce the next launch briefing of the Geneva Graduate Institute. Same place, same time, on US elections this time, with Professor Yussi Anhimaki. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.